Good morning, girls, and welcome to the third of my various lessons on non-fiction writing. I know you've had lessons from Miss Williams in between, but this is my third. And as you can see, it is comparing two passages of non-fiction writing, which is moving towards a skill that you will need to have for your GCSEs. One day that'll happen. Not a frightening thought, but we're just building up step by step so you're ready for it. So the first thing that we notice is that there are two different types of writing and they're on the same theme, which is usually what happens when you're asked to compare two passages. And in this case, we're told the first is travel writing and the second a travel brochure. Now, I don't know if you know what this means, but travel writing, as you can see, this one is called The Wind and My Wheels by Josie Dew, and it's describing Josie's visit to Pompeii and the Bay of Naples and then going on to Pompeii, and writing in such a way as to really make us interested in the whole area. And then the second one is a brochure, which is the kind of thing that you pick up in a travel agent, giving you some sort of suggestions of what holidays you might quite like. So they deliberately out to make a place sound very, very enticing. And as I said, I chose this passage because this is such a fascinating area to go and visit. I've picked up some pictures here for you to see. You can see you can see the Mount Vesuvius in the background of the Bay of Naples. That's the city of Naples on the right hand side. And then on the left hand side you can see we've got the ruins of Pompeii, the city which was a thriving city once in 79 AD, a very long time ago, nearly 2,000 years ago. And it's amazing. You can walk through, like you can see in the bottom right hand side down there, you can walk through the streets and imagine the people there and the lives they led, and they learnt a lot about the lives of the people that way. Equally, you've got these incredible pictures of real human beings, and in this case animals. You've got a little dog who were caught up in the terrible, terrible tragedy of Pompeii. I remember seeing those pictures when I was about your age and it totally capturing my imagination. I was so moved by the plight of those poor people. I had to imagine and read more and promise myself one day I would see it. Well, I have eventually aged 62, but I got there in the end while I was 60 or so. But it was worth it. It was a wonderful visit to see. So we've got this, as I say, two different types of writing, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. Now, I hope you've read the first passage. I'm not going to bore you by reading it again. But the first question is about finding facts. And we're told that a fact is something that can be proved to be true. Now pick up and write down 3 facts from the passage. How can you check that each one is a fact? Now all around you girls, you get facts, you get false facts, and you get opinions. At the moment we hear about fake news, and that's false facts. And opinions are often what people think, but they present them in such a powerful way that we assume they are facts. And we need to be aware of recognizing the difference between all these things. And these are some of the facts I picked out. We were told to only look at the first 4 lines, I think it was. No, all the way through. So we've got Vesuvius stands by the Bay of Naples. That's a fact. It erupted in 79 AD. It destroyed 3 towns. That more than 2,000 people died in Pompeii, that there's a blanket of ash and dust which covered them over 20 feet deep. I think that is on the first paragraph. You can go through the whole passage and perhaps pick out some more about the ash preserving the bodies, etc., etc. And the evidence that we know we have is through maps, through historical records, through archaeological evidence. Yes, there it is. 3 facts which seem to interest the reader now. We're going to have 3 things about Pompeii that seem to interest the reader. That's your next question. For each one, show how you know it interests her. And now I read through the whole paragraph and I let it run over me, and I looked paragraph by paragraph to see what the emphasis of the paragraphs were. That's the way writers work. That's the way they write. And for me, the first thing, we get round the facts of going there, but the facts about Pompeii start to come in the beginning of paragraph 1, where we see, first of all, the terrible, I think, destruction. She spends a lot of time talking about the fact that 2,000 people died between a blanket of ash and dust. Terrible. She talks about the horrific scenes of destruction and death. Can you see a word like horrific is an opinion rather than a fact? But we would probably all agree and share her opinion there. And the screams and lives that had been muffled and buried, that to me and to you, I'm sure, suggests the horror of the whole situation of the city of Pompeii. The other fact I think he comes up with is that she is fascinated by their complex and developed way of life. So we see that in paragraph 3 that the Romans were already enjoying many of the things which we consider to be modern. And my evidence would be central heating, one-way streets, takeaways were just 3 of their inventions. You can always pause and run things back if you think I'm going too fast. I go fast because I don't want this tape to go on and on for too long. And the third thing of my 3 is that she is haunted by the sadness of the deaths. The plaster of Paris moulds of the bodies which preserve the last moments of the people who died. And she describes this as dozens of motionless pictures in which we can even see their expressions, and uses the phrase, it is grim but compulsive viewing. Now girls, as you can see, I had to choose 3 things. It was worth 6 marks. So I found the 3 things and I found a piece of evidence for each one. So if you go through each one again, you'll see there was my first point, the terrible destruction, and my evidence. I've got 2 pieces of evidence to show that it was terrible there. Then I've gone through the next thing that he found interesting, which was their life, their modern life, that he's pointing out that there was central heating, one-way streets and takeaways. And the third piece of information is that he's haunted by the sadness of the deaths. And we've got the moulds and the dozens of motionless pictures in which we can even see their expressions, described as grim but compulsive viewing. And that would make up my 6 marks for that question. Right, now the next one was based on the second passage which you read, which was the brochure. And it started off with a little bit of language work about noun phrases. Now, as you might remember, a noun phrase has a noun and then it's a group of words and it gives us a bit more information. Quite often it will include an adjective or a phrase after it. For example, majestic Mount Vesuvius. And there we've got an adjective which is telling us something about the noun Mount Vesuvius. So I want you to get into the habit of looking out for the way that writers use noun phrases. And in order to do that, they've given you this little exercise. Copy and complete the chart, listing 5 more noun phrases from lines 1 to 4. and showing what impression each one gives. So that all together would probably be 8 marks. 4 marks for the noun phrases and 4 marks for explaining the impression it gives. So are you ready for it? And that's got to be taken from pretty much the first paragraph, I think. Right, now I've got them all up at once. Don't panic and read through them all. I'm going to go through them one by one. So the first one you were given by them, so I didn't count that in our 4. And if you're very bright, you'll notice I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you'd only need 4 of those. You don't need all of them. But I'm showing you I have actually found more noun phrases. Although, right, so the first one is majestic Vesuvius, majestic. Think of majesty, makes it sound royal and great, and therefore standing above everything else. Your Majesty would be the focus of everybody's view. Now the sparkling Bay of Naples is my next one. Now the word sparkling, think about it, girls. What sparkles? Diamonds, jewels, sparkle. Sunlight on water sparkles. Sparkling makes it sound precious and tempting, like a jewel. Precious, glittering, we go towards something that sparkles. And so I've said the water in this case is glittering in the sunshine. Right, the next one I've come up with is colourful Naples. Colourful sounds bright and positive, sunny and full of life. What is the opposite of colourful? Colourful is drab. Colourful is opposite is black and white. So what do we mean when we add colour? We usually bring something to life. So it sounds bright, it sounds positive, it sounds full of joy and energy. And those are the sort of words that you want to get across when you think of colourful. Next one, fascinating ruins of Pompeii. Now that word fascinating again. When something is fascinating, what does it mean? It means that you can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop looking at it. Do you agree? That it is filling your mind. So with the fascinating ruins of Pompeii, fascinating suggests that the ruins are unusual and make you wonder about the past. You could put that, ask questions so that you're continuously asking yourself about those ruins. The next one I've got down is finest scenery. Now the first thing I want you to notice is finest is the adjective, but it is a superlative. I don't know if you've heard of that, if you've done it at primary school, but you get an adjective, fine. You can compare it to something else, so it's comparative, it's finer. But the most fine is the superlative. And the most fine, we'd often use the EST, finest. And so that word finest, or fastest, or most beautiful, or most frightening, or most exciting, those are superlatives. That is telling me that you will not see anything better. So the use of the superlative, and I use those terms to show you understand that language, tells us that you will see the best scenery in Italy here. You don't need to go anywhere else. And then the last one I've got is infectious warmth and liveliness. Now think about infectious. Now I don't think I need to ask you to think too hard about that with our whole coronavirus COVID-19 thing going on. Infectious means it's easily caught. You can't escape it. And if you can easily catch a disease, you can equally easily catch happiness and laughter and joy, those things. And in this case, we are easily catching warmth and liveliness. Now, warmth is meaning that people are friendly, sociable, welcoming. Liveliness, it's going to be lots of fun, lots of joy, lots of laughter, lots to do. So putting all of those ideas together or summing them up, I've said this. Infectious suggests that the friendliness and joy of Naples will be irresistible, making you happy. Got it? And that is what I've done. That would get you your 10 marks, I think it was, for an extra 5 or whatever it was. I can't remember. But it is, yeah, that's right, 10 marks for that. Right, next one is the harder bit in a way. It's a lot more work, and if you only wrote one sentence each, you've really let yourself down in a way. You should be writing at least 2 sentences of comparison to make up 10 marks here. In GCSE, you're expected to write in a lot more detail, but you're in year 7, and I certainly wouldn't expect that now. We are taking baby steps. So at the moment, you just need to find 2 things to compare about each of these things. Right. Vesuvius and Pompeii are described. Also, I'm breaking it down. So the first thing I've asked you to describe is the Bay of Naples. Okay. Now, the Bay of Naples, we're told in the first passage, resembles a vast mouth ready to swallow whatever floats or falls in its way. Ouch. That doesn't sound very good. And so we think about a vast mouth ready to swallow. What technique is being used here? Right, the technique, if you can think about it, when you give a thing, a bay, a mouth is, I hope, personification. I hope you got that. It's the keys in the name, person, personification. Right, you've made it into a person with a mouth ready to swallow you up. And if you look at that picture, that mouth, would you like to go into that teeth, into that mouth? It may have lipstick and nice shiny teeth, but I tell you something, I do not want to enter there. And you think about the Bay of Naples. There it is, a bay is that shape of a mouth. It would go round like that. And then we've got the mountain above it going clonk down on top of you. It doesn't look much fun. In fact, it looks terrifying. So I've said this in good English. In text A, the writer presents the Bay of Naples as ominous and predatory. 2 very good words for you to use. Ominous means uh-oh. In good English, something bad is coming. Ominous. Omens. And predatory is like a lion or a cheetah coming to get you, coming to eat you up, or a dinosaur. Predatory. So Naples is ominous and predatory by using personification, and I've put in there the technique as well. Here, and I've put a quotation, it is like a vast mouth. I don't have to copy it all out, because you will be eaten alive and cannot escape. So the people of Pompeii will be caught between the volcano and the water, literally swallowed. And if you remember in my last lesson, I told you about those brackets. The word in the passage, if you can see, is swallow, but I have put on an ED, swallowed, so that is in brackets because they are my letters, not the passage's letters. Got it? Pause them as I say if I'm going too fast. Text B. Now, if we look at text B about Mount Vesuvius, about the Bay of Naples, it is nestling below majestic Mount Vesuvius. The sparkling Bay of Naples lays claim to some of Italy's finest scenery. And I've underlined the words that I would focus on. And let's look at the first two, nestling, sparkling. It's a sparkling bay, it's a nestling bay. What part of speech are those? Nestling, you can see the little chickies in their nest. Sparkling, bumps like a sparkler or a star. But what is nestling and what are sparkling in speech? They are adjectives. I hope you got that. So we're going to refer to them as adjectives. Lays claim is a verb. It lays claim. It demands it. And finest scenery is a noun. Scenery is noun and finest is adjective. So, but we're going to look particularly at nestling and sparkling, but also talk about lays claim and the scenery. Because, of course, not only nestling and sparkling, that gives us nice, cuddly feelings about Mount Vesuvius, if we like a little chickie in a nest getting its egg, or nestling, and sparkling Mount Naples. It sounds beautiful, but it is also not only doing that, but it is laying claim to the finest scenery. In other words, it has the best scenery. Lays claim means it's put its little flag there. That is mine. It is claiming its stake. So, in good English, in a paragraph, I've said this. In contrast, use a word like that, in contrast to the first one. The second paragraph presents a very positive picture. Think of the ominous and predatory. The last one, this is very happy and good. The use of the adjective nestling suggests that it's safe and cozy in the care of the mountain. It sparkles, exuding happiness and beauty and life. And this is reinforced, that means strengthened, when the writer uses the verb lays claim to suggest that the finest scenery is owned by the Bay of Naples. Okay, and I'm giving you good grammatical sentences using more demanding words like exude, which means to let things ooze out of it, oozing, because I want you to get used to using good English. Now we're going to move on to Mount Vesuvius, A and B. So there we had it, the looming versus the ever watchful and the mighty and the mouth, down to the Mount Vesuvius, which is nestling and majestic. I've put the two on the same page so you can really compare them. And as you can see, we've got very negative ones on looming, ever watchful. Sounds like the headmaster or the headmistress or the teacher coming, or the policeman or something coming up behind you to give you a whack. Well, not that anybody gives you a whack these days, headmasters, teachers or policemen, but still, you know what I mean. And mighty volcano sounds again very powerful and fearful in a way. And the mouth, of course, we've seen as very frightening. And against that we have nestling, which is so comforting, and majestic, which is so, we don't think the queen, who is majestic, is dangerous. She's magnificent. She's glorious, but she's not fearful, and she's fearful perhaps, but she's not bad. Majestic can be good and it can be bad depending on the person and the way they use their power. God is majestic. Right, looming behind is the ever watchful Mount Vesuvius, and it is this mighty volcano to which the mouth belongs. So I've said this about Mount Vesuvius. Again, text A is more menacing. I'm beginning to see this. Text A, they build up the fear. Text A is more menacing. The mountain looms, picking up the idea of an open mouth. Ever watchful gives you the feeling that you're constantly being monitored by a presence which dominates. You cannot escape it. Furthermore, the volcano is mighty. You will not be able to fight it, and it will control you, oops, my spelling, whether you like it or not. Girls, if I use a word that you don't understand, like dominates, monitored, look it up Look how I've used it, and hopefully you'll make it your own word. That is how you build on your English. And in the second paragraph, I've got in a similar way. The second paragraph presents Mount Vesuvius as large and powerful, because I think it does. Here the adjective is majestic. Like a monarch, it must be respected and has an enormous presence. But, and there's my key word, the word nestling changes the tone. Vesuvius is a protector, and Pompeii is like a baby snuggling into the side of a parent. And now for Pompeii. Now, Pompeii. We're told, we look up quickly and see what does it say about Pompeii in passage A. It erupted and swallowed up 3 flourishing towns. So Pompeii was one of 3 flourishing towns. In Pompeii alone, more than 2,000 people died. Oh, so that's bad news. Between a blanket of ash and dust 20 feet deep. Horrific scenes of destruction and death. Those eruptions are caused. So Pompeii was really horrific. The screams and lives had been muffled and buried, suffocated by this vast volcano. So some really ugly language I'm going to pick up on there about Pompeii, Pompeii's death. And that is that, first of all, it was flourishing. Secondly, that 2,000 people died. Thirdly, it was horrific that there was destruction and death and screams and lives muffled and buried. Whoa. So, next thing we've got about Pompeii in the second part is the massive layer of ash had preserved much of the detail of town life. I tagged onto the end of a tourist party and was intrigued to discover what forward thinkers these Romans had been. Central heating, one-way streets, takeaways were just 3 of their inventions. The bodies of the volcano's victims had left moulds in the solid ash before the flesh had decayed, and postures and even facial expressions of the terrified fleeing citizens captured at the very moment of death. It was grim but compulsive viewing. So again, I'm going to go through and pick out the things I want to make about Pompeii. Firstly, the massive layer of ash he talks about. He talks about town life, central heating, one-way streets, takeaways, just 3 of their inventions. He talks about the bodies and their postures being left in terrified, their expressions being terrified as these people are caught at their moment of death. You could have had grim but compulsive viewing. So to put all of that together in passage A, you're summoning all that into one big paragraph or 3 paragraphs I've got here. In passage A, the writer establishes Pompeii as a flourishing town. I think that's the first thing he does. He shows it as a good, positive, bustling place. A flourishing town has several thousand inhabitants. By picking out certain details, central heating, one-way streets, takeaways, he stresses that they led a life which was very much like our own, and we can therefore empathize with them when the terrible tragedy occurred. The next thing he does is he describes how the city was buried in ash, and this reminds us that it remained buried he describes us how the city was buried in ash and remained, and this reminds us that it remained there under these layers for centuries before it was excavated. And he focuses on the dead bodies preserved, their moments of terror preserved in pitiful postures and facial expressions. I think that's what he looks at when he's talking about Pompeii. So it's flourishing, it's how it was buried and stayed buried for centuries, and then how the bodies were preserved. That are the key things about Pompeii. Buried and the dead bodies. But passage B, when I look at that, and I picked out all the key things about Pompeii in passage B, I discovered that he does treat this horrific scene in a very different way. He says it is a city frozen in time, stopped in mid-action and embalmed in ash. Well, he's equally describing it being buried, but he's doing it in very different language, isn't he? He says it remained hidden rather than buried, hidden slightly different from buried. He talks about bakeries and one-way streets and graffiti. That's the same as the other one. And he talks about the dead bodies. He talks about a man crouches, covering his face with his hands, and in another, a young girl unable to escape the poisonous fumes is sheltered by her mother. So I think what I've done, whoopsie, is that I'm going to pick out the fact that he changes the tone in his description of Pompeii. The first one is horror, 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 and horror. Let's all die under loads and loads of ash and stone. And in this one, we've got more the language of Sleeping Beauty almost, or some sort of fairy tale, frozen in time. It sounds like Narnia. Suddenly we all stop in mid-action as though we might burst into life again later on. Embalmed as peaceful. Hidden, as I say, not buried. The one-way streets, the bakeries and the graffiti are very similar to the other one in terms of modern, very similar to modern life. But in the second one, we've got crouches, not cowers, covering his face with his hands. And the young girl, unable to escape the poisonous fumes, is sheltered by her mother, not dies desperately beside her mother. Do you know what I mean? The language is different. The sheltered and crouches changes it. So, putting that all together, I'm able to compare the way they describe Pompeii, which is very different. Although the whole thing, as I say, the details, the facts don't change. The facts don't change, but the opinions, in a way, the way they see it, has. So, many details in passage B are the same. Here too we are presented with a modern city, bakeries, one-way streets and graffiti, and equally we're told that the city was discovered under layers of ash. Facts. However, the facts about exactly when the city were unearthed differ. Did you pick that up? That was perhaps a false fact. One of them had to be false. One of them was wrong about when it was unearthed. And then the right of the second passage creates a very different tone, one of mystery, almost enchantment, rather than claustrophobic burying. He uses words like frozen, embalmed, and hidden, which has connotations of Sleeping Beauty. This is reinforced by the descriptions of the bodies, crouched and sheltered, with the mention of there being with a mother. I mean, if you're going to die, dying with your mother is better than dying alone, isn't it? So I've picked out, as I've gone, very different feelings in this. Now, having got through all of this, I'm much more able to tackle the last piece, which is about who they're written for. And I would make a point about that. The purpose. So what was the reason why the first guy was quite happy to throw all this horrific information at us, while the second one toned it down? And I think it's their purpose. So the first one, he wants to interest us. He wants to engage us. So text A is a piece of travel writing. And the author's purpose is to entertain, pique the interest of the reader. We all like reading horror. The more gruesome, the better. He therefore focuses on creating strong emotions, and in this case, horror and pity engage us. We get drawn into it. But text B has a very different purpose. Text B, on the other hand, is a travel brochure. Now, he doesn't want to terrify the wits out of us, so we don't want to go there. He hopes to entice the tourist to visit the region, so it focuses on beauty and mystery. Now, I know that's an awful lot to get through, girls, and it's much longer than the other two videos because there's so much to go through, but it's the most difficult. And I hope you'll go through it more slowly because I have talked very, very fast. Good luck, girls.